Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions and this VorpX setup guide for Dishonored, a game that's been sitting there in my library since Christmas, for which I've been taking forever to even get to. Now, before we get started with our game, I want to point out that this series of VorpX tutorials begins with the VorpX Universal Guide. If you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend it as it serves as the series' foundation. There will be a link to the Universal Guide at the top of the description of this video. Next, the videos in this series are all open for updates. If you see the tag outdated in the title of this video, it means this tutorial has been completely redone. If you see the tag updated, it means we've released additional information regarding this setup. If you see either tag, check the description for a link to either a new tutorial or the update video. Keep in mind that all the videos in this series have a table of contents with timecode links in the description, so you can easily skip to any section of the guide. Now let's get to Dishonored! And I have to point out something important. This game was gifted to me by my friend Eincro from Eincro Productions Co. and Red Pill Gaming Reviews, and I really have to thank him for this one because I did not have a single clue what kind of game this was, what the franchise was about, or even who made the damn thing. A complete and total surprise. Granted, now that I know a little more, I can safely say that the game doesn't completely fit my playstyle. I'm terrible at stealth if it's not an extremely terrifying horror game, but this doesn't mean I'm not enjoying it. Surprisingly, being terrible at classic stealth, I've found enough elements to be impressive, sometimes downright mind-blowing, that I could not dismiss the game, not just for tutorials but for myself as well. That being said, this wasn't done without a good deal of problems. Let it be known that this game's VorpX testing session was interrupted twice by near game-breaking issues. One of the problems in particular is downright confusing, and it'll even require us to get a sort of hybrid manual VR direct VR configuration going. The important thing here you have to know before we jump into settings is this. I finally chose to make the tutorial, which means I did finally find a setup worthy of sharing, one that won't cause too much of a headache or hardship. The bottom line, despite the problems I had, is actually pretty impressive. Let's make sure that SteamVR or Oculus Home isn't running and that VorpX is also closed. We're first going to open our game in order to go change a few things. First, when you enter the options, you'll be in the General tab. Lower the head bob amount to 0 there to prevent motion sickness. Also take care to disable the kill cam, that ain't no good for VR. Once you've done that, go in the graphics options, then enter the video settings. Over there, you'll want to have full screen to on, have VSync to off, and you'll want a resolution of 1920 by 1080. Apply your changes and go back to the graphics options. There's 3 anti-aliasing options: off, MLAA, or FXAA. I recommend MLAA as for a rare time this artificial anti-aliasing technique is working quite decently in this game. Next, go in the Controls tab, then in Mouse Options. First, it's best to work with the stock default mouse sensitivity here, and second, make sure to disable mouse smoothing and each assist. Once you're done, go ahead and escape back to the main menu, at which point your settings will have saved. That's about it for the game's own settings. You can start playing the game to test it if you want, but that's not necessary. I'm going to exit and head to the next step. Open up the VorpX configuration tool. Go to the Game Settings Optimizer section and pick the Dishonored profile. Leave the default field of view value of 110, uncheck resolution, leave the latency options checked, and click Optimize Settings. This should have applied a few changes that will make the game run smoother in VorpX, along with the field of view being correct. You can go ahead and close your VorpX configuration tool. We've got one more thing left to do before we fire up the game. We need to disable the dynamic shadows in this game. They're a huge eyesore in stereoscopic 3D, and they're quite a waste as I've found the static shadows to be quite convincing enough already. Navigate to the path I'll be showing you on your screen and open the file dishonoredengine.ini. Locate the value Dynamic Shadows. It should be under the System Settings section of that file. Change that value from true to false. Save the file and close it. So we're ready for the game now, but I want to explain a few of these options before we move on. No, I'm not offering multiple resolution options, mostly because this game generally runs like smooth butter coated in automobile oil. We're also not using a 4:3 resolution. Why? Because custom aspect ratios require windowed mode to work, and during my tests I've seen the mouse pointer fly right out of the window mid-play, effectively either pausing the game or resulting in a complete loss of controls. We're faced with the same problem I had with BioShock Infinite. We're kind of forced to play this in full screen at our monitor's aspect ratio in order to get proper results. Okay, get ready. Start your VR runtimes, either Oculus Home or SteamVR, start VorpX, and finally fire up your game. First things first, VorpX has set you two hotkeys for the game. Normal field of view is F3 and VR field of view is F4. Press F4 to enable the big field of view. Now find a spot to stand in without getting disturbed so you can open the VorpX HUD and configure your settings. Press the delete key to open the VorpX HUD, and first, under main settings, set 3D reconstruction to geometry if it isn't already. Then set 3D separation strength to 0.7. Hop over to image settings. Set crystal image to off. Now for my tests, I had my HUD scale set to 0.45. You might want this a little higher to make things easier to read, but passing above 0.5 will make the interface too large to see. Set image zoom to 0.95. Here I'm squeezing the image down ever so slightly to further increase pixel density. Even that little 5% improve things a good deal. Next, hop on over to display settings. Make sure direct mode async render is set to on, but also make sure direct mode fluid sync remains on as well. By parts, fluid sync makes no difference, but whenever this game runs under 70 frames per second, the head tracking becomes very uneven without this feature, even using direct VR. Fluid sync seems to almost completely eliminate this issue. Last, under head tracking settings, make sure your head tracking sensitivity is at the default of 1.0. This value will work well if you left the game's mouse sensitivity on the default value and turned off smoothing and assist. If you've ever adjusted your mouse sensitivity to anything else than default in this game, you'll need to find a corresponding head tracking sensitivity yourself. I suggest watching the manual VR settings section of the VorpX Universal Guide, where the shoulder-to-shoulder sensitivity adjustment method is demonstrated. Now let's head over to the Direct VR section of the settings. Hit the button to run a Direct VR scan. Normally, I prefer using this button rather than the Direct VR shortcut key, as in most cases the Direct VR scan hotkey conflicts with a control in the game, or worse, a hotkey that opens a game menu, thus ruining the Direct VR scan. Now, there's a catch here. You might notice I had you set this up like a manual VR configuration. This is about to come into play. There's a huge chance your field of view scan will fail. It seems that based on completely random factors, the whole Direct VR scan can fail. You'll get a positive result on rotation, a failure on the field of view scan, which will end up invalidating the entire thing, killing the head tracking and giving out an incorrect field of view. This happens pretty much anywhere and anytime. In areas where your scan once worked, it'll suddenly fail, and vice versa. I found no consistent way of predicting where and when this problem will happen. Fear not, we've got a backup setup here. If this should happen at any point in the game, if you're using the same settings as I've shown here, go ahead and flip the Direct VR option to off in the VorpX HUD, and voila. For the time being, you'll have a fairly excellent manual VR configuration, which will allow you to continue playing through sections that result in a failed Direct VR scan. Don't forget, after turning DirectVR off, to press the F4 key to re-enable your large field of view. At this point, after about 3 hours of testing, I've had DirectVR scans fail pretty much anywhere the game wanted. And sometimes, suddenly trying a DirectVR scan would yield correct results. If you're using our manual VR fallback method because a scan failed, once you've played like that for a while, open up the HUD and re-attempt your scan. It might just end up working. Either way, you're kind of covered here. You've got one configuration that works without DirectVR, and the immediate option of trying a DirectVR scan at any point in time. Keep in mind the DirectVR cache doesn't seem to be in effect here. Moments where I've had to rescan my DirectVR were when loading the game after closing it completely, or after a player death. It seems the scans affect your current session only. That's it for the manual VR settings with a little touch of DirectVR. You are now ready to play Dishonored with some pretty damn honorable VR results. If you want to know more on the potential issues with this setup, including the one I just described, keep on watching. It's time to cover the notes and known issues for this game. Don't you like a good, comfortable seat on a waterfront, enjoying the beautiful view while having a refreshing cold beverage? Wait. Ow. Ow. My eyes. Dude, this hurts. Ow. Yeah, this game's water surface reflections are completely fucked. It's not everywhere though. The water you can actually swim in looks fine, but the large surfaces like lakes will really be an eyesore to look at. It's a bummer because the DirectVR field of view feature is working fairly well in this game, and most of the cutscenes were not zoomed in for me. Everything looked just right, except that damn water. I haven't found any water reflection specific options yet. It's a bit jarring and kind of an unwanted reminder that this is third-party VR, but in my tests it did not affect gameplay enjoyment. For the most part, I just didn't have any water in view and thus no eyesores stabbing me in the face. If you're seeing eyesore shadows, you might have missed the step where we turn dynamic shadows off. Don't worry about doing that, by the way. It barely changes the game's appearance since their baked shadows are aplenty, and doing it will spare you a pretty large deal of constant eyesores. The reason why I make sure to turn the dynamic shadows off is that these bad shadows are absolutely everywhere you're going to look, and for the most part they're an exact repetition of the game's already neat baked shadows. Next, this game is prone to failing DirectVR scans, and there's nothing you can do about it but move on to another area or room in the game. I'd love to know the exact cause of these failed scans, but right now I can only speculate, having only about 3 hours of total testing time with 2 starts from the beginning. The point where I was really screwed in my test was when I made a mistake with one of the rat sections in the sewers. I let my player get killed to try the section again, which resulted in a loss of DirectVR settings. Given I was now reloading from an area that refused to let the DirectVR scan pull through, I had to revert to manual VR, cross 2 small areas, and finally was able to run my scan a few minutes in. There is zero consistency to DirectVR with this game. It will literally just work when it wants, where it wants. For the most part, it will just fail. It even has the gall of sometimes giving false positives, saying the whole scan worked, but giving no working results. A small but visible issue I noticed is this game seems to be arm wrestling DirectVR when it comes to the field of view. You'll see a persistent wobble in it that seems to worsen if your game isn't running smoothly. For example, when I use the Oculus Mirror app to capture this video, the most demanding type of capture I can perform, the wobble issue becomes more prominent. Last but not least, DirectVR causes a glitch with dialogue scenes. Whenever a cutscene requires you to choose a dialogue option, DirectVR will prevent said options from showing. If you notice your cutscene seems stuck, just toggle DirectVR to off, wait for the dialogue prompt to come up, and turn DirectVR back to on. You don't even need to leave DirectVR to off to perform the dialogue choice, just toggling it to off and immediately back on seems to resolve the problem. Keep in mind you will not need to rescan after toggling DirectVR, so this workaround is pretty safe to use at any point in time. Now before closing off the notes, I want to point out that I do play this game with my modified hardware ball mouse. This is a mouse I normally use for manual VR only games because it has the vertical axis completely disabled on it. This allows me to keep my in-game head level matching my real-life head level, something only DirectVR can pull off if you don't use any workarounds. Since we have to often fall back to manual VR here, I play my entire sessions with my pitch-lock mouse. I do keep my normal mouse plugged in and within reach of hand while playing so I can readjust my vertical axis should it drift or be moved by the game by a cutscene or an animation.
This is a momentous occasion, Crow.
What the hell am I playing, Eincrow? Seriously, what the hell is this game? At first I thought I was in for a classic stealth game, maybe in the likes of Thief, or maybe borrowing some elements from Metal Gear while having a completely different style and presentation. And oh wow, could I be more wrong? The point where I sort of realized I still had no idea what I was in for was the first dream sequence type scene. Dream sequence. Hallucinatory voyage. I'm still not sure what this was, but it sure was awesome to experience. I realize I'm in for a little, or maybe a lot more than a simple classic stealth game. It needs to be known that stealth is really not my thing, not if it's not high-tension horror. I've found out, it seems, that if a game isn't keeping me in check by freaking me the hell out constantly, I might just get too complacent for a stealth game. This is resulting in me probably not playing Dishonored as it's intended. In fact, expect me to get the darkest outcomes in this. I've taken a loving in the two-handed weapon system, and I'm not afraid to use it generously. Yes, I'm playing the game like a straight-up shooter. It's a bit wrong, but again, classic stealth is really not my thing. I don't have the patience for it, but at the same time, I can't let that stop me from enjoying Dishonored, which seems to be a masterpiece so far, so I'm adapting the gameplay to something that's more comfortable for me. That dream sequence, fever acid trip, whatever that was, not only was it amazing, but this game was developed in 2012, and here they are introducing me to a blink mechanic. A blink mechanic that works 5 times better than most VR-specific teleportations I've ever seen. Why in the hell does a game made in 2012 have such a perfect virtual reality blink teleport mechanic implemented? It's so well done, it actually gives you a little rush when you use it. You can kind of feel the power of that teleport energy. It's quite the feeling. Believe me, had this game not started off this impressive, good cutscenes, nice visual effects, almost all working in perfect stereoscopic 3D, I probably would have given up on the game when I encountered the DirectVR scan problem. But this is way too good an experience to let a bug like that get in the way. It's definitely nowhere near just a classic stealth game. In fact, I'm still not sure what the fuck it is I'm playing. It's pretty cool though. Let's go ahead and give Dishonored its vScore. The vScore is a scoring system created to evaluate how well games featured in this series work with VorpX. It's based on 9 criteria, 8 that yield points and 1 that is a penalty value. The criteria are, first, the fixed points values where a game is given all or nothing for each. Acceptable 3D method. This is worth 30 points. If we can't have depth perception, we cannot have VR. Proper geometry 3D. Geometry 3D brings the game to life by providing the only authentic stereoscopic 3D method, so 15 points for that. Since we got some great results with Geometry 3D in Dishonored, and since those awful shadows could be killed off, this game gets all the 3D points it can get, 30 and 15. Proper head tracking. Head tracking that goes all over the place is no fun, so this is worth 15 points. We have 2 correct methods of getting head tracking with this game, so no worries here, 15 points. Second, the variable criteria, where the amount of points can be adjusted for each item. Sufficient field of view. A game really needs some means for forcing the field of view, and because of the various ways we can achieve this, some more effective and some less, this is worth up to 15 points. Again, here, the game gives us 2 quick and easy solutions. A nice and simple 15 points for field of view. Proper 3D hands and weapons. This has over time become a nice to have for third-party VR as it's quite rare, but it does get a game up to 5 points for getting it right. Finally, this is only the second time I can give a first-person shooter the full 5 points here. Dishonored's hand models are so damn good, you'll think you're looking at your own freaking hands. Okay, they're a bit large, but if you look at all the characters in this game, everyone does seem to have disproportionately large hands. It seems to be the art style rather than the 3D depth being wrong. Proper shadows and graphics. Good functional shadows are hard to come by in third-party VR, especially dynamic ones, and it's nice to see all our graphics effects working properly, so a game can gain up to 5 points on those. While Dishonored rewards us with amazing hand models, I can't say as much for the shadows and graphics. The water reflection issue is a genuine eyesore, and while the dynamic shadows being off isn't too much a visual impact, it's not ideal to have to turn that off in the first place. 3 points on shadows and graphics for Dishonored. Proper user interface and heads-up display. Being able to see your health, ammo count, and such is a plus, isn't it? Up to 5 points for how a game handles a heads-up display. This HUD definitely is not perfect, but this isn't uncommon with VorpX-powered VR, and the fact that the HUD responds well to the scaling feature, and the fact that objective markers are very, very well placed in the 3D space, the game gets a 4 out of 5 here. Direct VR bonus. Direct VR makes the process of setting up a game much easier and often delivers perfect head tracking. Based on how a game supports it, it can get up to 10 points in bonus. I think this is the first time I'll be doing this, but this game is definitely not getting all its points here, despite supporting Direct VR. Why? Because it only supports Direct VR when it feels like doing so. This is really ineffective and sort of complicates things, while Direct VR is meant to achieve the exact opposite of that. I'm only giving 1 point here because for the most part the feature is utterly useless in this game and worth only 1 out of a dozen scans. In fact, I think the developers of VorpX do themselves a disfavor by even listing it as supported. Next, the penalty. The penalty criteria is here to offset a game's score due to glitches or major issues. Up to 10 points can be withdrawn. I'm going to slash off 1 point here, because in addition to having some Direct VR scans die on us, we're also going to have to toggle Direct VR momentarily here and there in order to get dialogue options to show up. This is annoying, you have to remember to do it, and sometimes when you forget, it'll have you sitting there like a dumbass waiting for the game to do something until you remember to actually do the toggle. Not game-breaking, but considerably annoying. The bottom line with Dishonored is a fair vScore of 87. Yes, it's a low score relative to other Direct VR titles we've covered, but having it figured out for the most part, this game is good enough to keep me going and fun enough that I can just dismiss these issues and move along. Strangely, I like the stealth game's gunplay? Yeah, the gunplay in Melee is very good for VR. And when I let the elements I like sink in, it's hard to even let the bugs bother me. This isn't quite as first-party VR as, say, BioShock Infinite would be, but it really gets close. Dishonored is another great headline game for VorpX. Now, speaking of games that could justify the cost of VorpX, I have to report I've discovered one that is exactly not that. I've been looking at the comments, and of course a very frequently recurring title is Grand Theft Auto 5. I've finally gotten around to a first test session which lasted 3 hours, running tests using VorpX on its own, and combinations of VorpX and flawless widescreen. I am very sorry to report that this session was the most infuriating, fruitless testing rounds I have ever performed with any game since the beginning of this series. The VorpX support in GTA 5 is borderline embarrassing. The Direct VR support is dysfunctional and incomplete, with it only handling the field of view and managing to get that wrong most of the time. Geometry 3D support has indeed been added, but it's an eyesore mess with bad shadows, aliasing to no end, and even worse, a performance resulting in 20 to 30 frames per second on low settings with a GTX 1080 on an i7 system. The world scale in the car is different from the one in the game. The Z-normal 3D reconstruction will have your car windows showing you a 2D view of the outside world, which makes driving unplayable. And last but not least, during my few hours of testing, the game crashed on me at least 20 times. At least 20 fucking times. The game has currently a weak vScore of 62, and making a tutorial for something that bad would be a disservice to all of you. Things went so horribly that I will honestly wait a bit before I perform one more experiment with it. DirectVR is completely out of the question for Grand Theft Auto 5 as it just doesn't work, but there is a community-made add-on that seems to be capable of helping VorpX work the game a little better. I'll give that a try, but first I have to let the sheer rage of this infuriating test session wash over, as it literally was completely unbearable. A kick in the nuts really, because I was hoping GTA 5 would work. Right now I still have Metro 2033 somewhat in my sights, but what worries me here is the version of the game you'll require for VR to work is the original edition. VorpX does not work with the Redux, at least not to my standards. I'm not too keen on covering a game whose version you can't even buy anymore other than getting lucky with old G2A keys. Do tell me in the comments if you want me to cover Metro 2033. Maybe enough of you own it that it'll be worth my while. It could just automatically happen at some point because I want to play it, but I'll hurry my ass up if I see my viewers really want it. I still see requests about Skyrim, but I'm not very specialized with that game. I know Fallout 4 way better than I do Skyrim. I might pass on it. Remember, it's only a month away from getting its own proper VR support. At this point, the list of games I know I can cover for sure without any major VorpX issues are both Borderlands games, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, both Portal games, and finally, Hard Reset. As usual, I encourage suggestions for games I should eventually cover. I can't go over all of them, but it does help knowing what you guys might be looking for. Thanks for watching this VorpX guide, folks. This has been Stereo 3D Productions, and I shall see you next time.